Hello, welcome to my project. All right, so after multiple rounds of feedback, the specific PICO question I ended up with was for children and adolescents ages 9 to 18 in school settings who make residual speech errors for R, does spectral visual-acoustic biofeedback compared to clinician-provided knowledge of performance alone improve acquisition and generalizability of accurate R productions? As for what exactly a residual speech error is, for the purposes of this project, we're going to define it as a speech error that persists beyond the age of 8, which is aligned with the Shields and Hopf article that I will talk about later. Alright, so again, the intervention and focus for this project is spectral visual-acoustic biofeedback, which is a total mouthful. And what it means is using a program that displays the formants of a sound, its prominent frequencies of a target sound, and then the students work to learn how to manipulate their vocal tracks so that the sound they're producing matches that visual display. And here are the steps. So step 1, the student tries to produce an R and is recorded in a program like Pratt, which is free, open source, and gives you like a spectral display. And then the acoustics of their utterance, represented by that either spectrogram or another spectrum, some have like more of like mountain peaks for the formants, are compared to the formants of an accurate production to see where any differences lie. Then the students get feedback from the clinician like, hey, rounding your lips, moving your tongue back can lower that F2, or retroflexion of the tongue can decrease the third format, and these are important for accurate productions. And then in addition to feedback, the clients get a chance to play, so meaning like they can trial different sounds and see what happens as far as the spectrogram goes. I also wanted to define my comparison. So knowledge of performance, or KP feedback, is input on how a movement was executed. So something like, oh, your tongue needs to be higher in your mouth. And this type of feedback usually aids acquisition, but for the specific population in my project, this has not been the case for many of them. Also, when you hear knowledge of performance, you often hear knowledge of results. That kind of feedback is more about like, were your efforts, what was the result? Did it end up with an accurate production? And these are very common in like K through 12 speech therapy, articulation therapy. Okay, so lots to cover on this slide. This is all about, in theory, why should spectral visual-acoustic biofeedback work? Okay, so for one, imaging has shown functional and structural differences in the brains and the fine motor planning areas of those with residual speech sound errors. And it seems that it has to maybe do with poor auditory perception of R. So the idea is that if internally it is difficult to perceive this sound or differentiate it between maybe R and W sound, that having this external display should be helpful. Something outside of the body to gauge whether or not the productions are accurate. Also, it's aligned with operant conditioning, so like rewards for desired behavior, punishments for undesired behavior. That sounds extreme. I guess we're not punishing anyone per se, but just say, giving that praise when productions are aligned with the target, or like what, on the other hand, I mean saying, oh, that wasn't quite it, giving that positive and negative feedback. In part, the idea of biofeedback is aligned with the principles of motor learning, especially in terms of getting a lot of instant feedback. In other ways, it's a little different from the principles of motor learning, and I'll talk about later how it seems that this implies that maybe it'd be good to combine the biofeedback with maybe more traditional approaches aligned with the motor learning principles. Cybernetic theory confused me a lot, but I think I got it. So cybernetic theory has to do with how systems have feedback loops or need feedback loops to function properly and respond to their environment. So just like a thermostat has to be calibrated in order to deal with the input it gets. If the temperature goes down to a certain point, it should maybe kick on some heat, and it has to be calibrated to do the right thing. Likewise, a person who maybe internally has this, maybe poor auditory perception, has some sort of internal mechanism that is not, doing what it should, then again, having this external feedback can maybe help calibrate that intrinsic feedback mechanism, and provide, it can also, just like other systems, provide living organisms with the ability to regulate their own actions related to the environment they're in. So for this project, I'll be creating a treatment plan for Ava. She's an 11-year-old middle schooler who enjoys biking and music and art, and her parents work full-time, and she has a younger brother who is autistic and has some high support needs, so that will have implications later. She has been diagnosed with a speech sound disorder that was starting at the age of 5. She used to have trouble also with sh, s, and z, but has remediated those sounds and is now left with just the inaccurate R sound. She has experienced some bullying at school due to her speech sound disorder, and her motivation is low, especially because she believes that, like, in connected speech, normal conversation that is naturally paced, that accurate R production is just not feasible for her. And briefly, I just want to talk about what a difficult sound R is, why it's so complex. So there's more than one way to form it. The tongue is in contact with almost nothing in the mouth when you're making that sound. At the same time as you're doing that, the oral cavity and the lips have to be constricted a bit. And then there are different variants of R, like different, maneuvers your mouth has to make to form them depending on the context, like where they are in the word, whether it's at the beginning or after a vowel. Because if you think about some vowels, you have to go from like E to R, ah to R, and they're just different ways of gliding, and that can be really hard. So it makes sense that R is one of the last sounds to develop for everyone, and why it can be so difficult for so many people for so many years. So despite the difficulty of producing R, not acquiring it can have negative social, educational, and employment impacts. And as we said, Ava has already experienced bullying for her, difficulty with the sound, and we want to nip that in the bud as soon as possible. On to the heart of this project, the evidence. I'll spend some extra time on this set of slides because they provide the foundation for all of the decisions that I make for the treatment plan. This slide says literature review, but I did review more than 4 articles. This is just the breakdown of the levels of evidence for the 4 articles most relevant to my topic. And I use not the ASHA level of evidence here, but I liked the Low, Biondo, Wood, and Haber breakdown, meaning that level 1 is systematic reviews or meta-analyses of randomized control trials. Level 2 is the randomized control trials themselves or evidence from at least one of them. And level 3, quasi-experimental, meaning maybe not randomized, equivalent to ASHA's level 2B. And my top 4 articles all fell into those 3 levels. All right, so on to the evidence, and we'll start with external evidence. This slide kind of shows the, my earliest articles from 1980 and then ranges up to the current day. So we've got a variety in here, but mostly recent articles. My first article was this systematized review from Shields and Hopf on intervention for residual speech errors in adolescents and adults, so very relevant to my topic. And they aimed to explore the literature that's out there on the available successful treatments for fostering acquisition of residual speech errors. And I'll put the details of the studies they surveyed on the slide. Feel free to pause if I can't get to all of this within the time limit. But what they found was that more intensive schedules resulted in better outcomes, and that instrumental approaches that provide visual biofeedback can potentially facilitate successful articulation of error sounds where traditional approaches fail to do so. So that helps me answer my PICO question, with the caveat being that gains were not always generalized, pointing to the need to maybe combine approaches, to maybe follow the visual acoustic biofeedback with the more traditional approaches like the knowledge of performance and knowledge of results feedback. They also said that approaches were especially successful for highly motivated individuals, which is pretty intuitive but important to keep in mind. And the limitation of this study is likely that they were overly exclusive. They did not include studies on this topic with autistic populations or those with genetic conditions like Down syndrome, those with a history of hearing impairment. And including those studies might have actually been helpful to paint a more detailed picture, especially for those of us who want to go into school settings, because we are likely going to have kids on our caseload with those diagnoses with residual speech errors. And I want to know, are these results that they found applicable to them? My second article is investigating the use of traditional and spectral biofeedback approaches to intervention for R misarticulation, so very, very relevant to my topic. And the authors here aim to study the response of children with residual speech errors to traditional and spectral biofeedback. So what they did was have each participant take part in 10 weeks of treatment. They did 4 to 6 weeks of traditional approaches, followed by 4 to 6 weeks with spectral biofeedback. And they found that the spectral biofeedback did result in more perceptually accurate productions of R. Now that supported their hypothesis, but they also admitted that it was a pretty limited effect size. Other limitations include that they didn't have separate groups for the traditional treatment and the biofeedback treatment. So it's kind of hard to parse which treatment led to which results. Also, within the children in their group, they ranged from 6 to almost 12. Those 6, 7, and 8-year-olds may still be in the process of acquiring R, which is why I didn't include that age group in my question. So it's not a perfect match for my PICO question. And 10 out of the 11 participants were male. They were all monolingual English speakers with normal auditory processing, hearing, oral motor function. So just like in the last article, I can't always apply these results to the children I'll be working with, especially if they're female, second English speakers, etc. My third highlighted article is comparing biofeedback types for children with residual R errors in American English, which was a single case randomization design. The participants were 7 children or adolescents ages 9 to 16 with residual speech errors for R. They had 10 sessions with both 45-minute ultrasound feedback and 45 minutes of visual acoustic biofeedback. The condition order was randomized. And 5 of the 7 participants demonstrated acquisition of R within specific words. In most cases, ultrasound and visual acoustic biofeedback were both effective, with the exception of one participant for whom the visual acoustic biofeedback resulted in significantly better results. And this is good news that, there are kind of similar outcomes for both ultrasound and the visual acoustic biofeedback, because schools don't tend to have access to ultrasound machines. And finally, the fourth article is a tutorial on using visual acoustic biofeedback for speech sound training. And participants were, the focus was on individuals over the age of 8 with a speech sound disorder, though they did discuss possibly using it with second language learners or those with hearing impairment too. And this is a tutorial based on a summary and application of the body of evidence on this subject, including at least one randomized control trial. Some of the results that they say to consider are that the SLP and the student need to comprehend spectral displays, because spectrograms are not kind of an everyday chart we're all used to looking at. The accurate target selections need to match the population you're working with. And if you're working with a child, you want to have an accurate R production from a child to compare theirs to. And then based on the summary of the research, they said that improved acquisition and generalization are likely for some if the steps outlined in the article are used. Okay, it's time to start bringing it all together. So, external evidence supports other types of instrumental biofeedback too, not just the visual acoustic spectral biofeedback, but also ultrasound and electropalletography. But I don't know any school that would have access to that kind of machinery. So, we're going to just forget about those and focus on the free and open source programs um, for spectral information that we discussed. Also, as far as internal evidence goes, this specific student has become demotivated, and that can hamper her success in treatment. So, my thought is that maybe sharing some of this research I presented today on the potential success of this approach and how it's different from anything she's done before could renew her motivation. So, the research also indicates the effectiveness of high intensity treatment for this issue, meaning many sessions are helpful. Normally, to me, that would say, oh, it'd be great to give the student homework so that it's like they're getting more sessions at home. But given the details of this family, it's just not feasible. Ava's parents are working full time, taking her and her brother to extracurriculars, plus her brother has these high support needs because he's autistic. So it's just asking them to be involved in at-home sessions is too big an ask. I can't put something else on their plate. So instead, what might help is group treatment. In a school setting with a high caseloads, if everyone had an individual session, there just wouldn't be enough hours in the week to have very many sessions per person. But in a group treatment setting, maybe that would allow for more sessions with Ava each week. And the external evidence here supports homogeneous groups, meaning they're all working on residual speech errors for R specifically. So that's ideally what we would have Ava in at school. Okay, so it all comes down to this now, the treatment plan that ties it all together. So I would say I'm interested in how to prioritize caseloads in various SLP environments. Who do you pick up or not and why? And I would prioritize Ava, even if the caseload was high at her school, because despite her probable intelligibility, even though she's lacking motivation, I think because of the potential social, educational, and employment impacts that could happen as a result of her speech error, I'd want to pick her up and I'd want to address her motivation first in the hopes that using an approach she's never done before could renew her hope for, remediating the sound. And I'd also want to do some motivational interviewing and ask her directly, what does she see as doors that would open as a result of acquiring this sound. Because again, motivation is a key factor. And intensity matters too. So we're again going to focus on those homogeneous groups so that she can get more sessions per week. And we're going to follow the recommendations to have 100 to 150 trials per session. And we're going to generally use that tutorial for spectral visual acoustic biofeedback, the Hitchcock et al. Summary to, hopefully increase our success. We are going to kind of a hybrid approach where we do indeed use the spectral visual acoustic biofeedback, and then we follow it with the more traditional approaches to aid generalization. And if possible, I thought maybe also I would refer the family to any local clinics that provide maybe ultrasound or electropalletography articulation treatment, if they exist, if you can find them, because that would be another way to increase, sessions in the week outside of school. If the family does find that they have time for that and they're interested, they can do that on their own. So thankfully, this class forced us to walk through the evidence-based practice process slowly. So we do have a lot of strengths, I think all of us do, as far as these projects go, but there are strengths and weaknesses always. So I'm going to walk through some of those now. As far as external evidence goes, I followed the guidelines in class. I used the supplemental worksheet for evaluating my evidence, used several synonyms in the literature research, and I focused on recent articles. So those are all the strengths of my external evidence. Though I will mention that when you look through my longer reference list, you'll see a lot of like repetition of names, kind of the Hitchcock and Preston and McAllister, and some of these people like kind of all work together in different combinations. So I mean, of course, like they bring their own biases, and so you want a variety of researchers, and it's a lot of the same group. But ideally, in the future, some more researchers will get involved in looking into this topic. Um, I was considerate of internal evidence as well, and I integrated it. So I thought about my client's preferences and her situation, her family's situation. And as far as clinical expertise goes, I mean, this is it's a real world problem that I wanted to tackle. It's something I saw in clinic, wanted to learn more about. And I've seen biofeedback work when I was an ESL teacher, at least. Speech to text on the phone as a type of biofeedback was motivating and helpful for some of my students before. So I have this internal feeling like it could work. Am I potentially biased? Of course. So I think my bias would come from like my eagerness to be accepting of almost anything different. Like when I was in clinic before and would ask a lot about like, what do you do for these kids who've been doing this for years and it's not working? I just wasn't getting answers that I wanted to hear. Nothing, it felt like a lot of like just try the same things that they did before. So I think maybe was overly eager to be like, yeah, let's do anything new. But I really do think this is a safe approach to try out in real life treatment contexts. And next term, when I'm at a middle school, if given the chance, I would like to try it. All right, that's all, folks. Thank you. And just feel free to pause it on these slides.